They spray-painted boat trash across my dead uncle's pristine cabin cruiser while I slept inside. I'm talking neon orange letters, 8 inches tall, dripping down 40 feet of spotless white fiberglass like blood on a wedding dress. The aerosol can's still hissing when I find it at 6 a.m. Whoever did this wanted me to hear it, smell those toxic fumes burning my nostrils, see my inheritance destroyed in real time. This boat survived 30 years of Colorado mountain storms without a scratch. Now it looks like a billboard of shame, visible from every house on the lake. The wet paint comes off on my hands like orange guilt, impossible to wash clean. The violation notice duct taped to my windshield? HOA President Delilah Thornfield demanding I remove my boat for creating unsightly ripples. 72 hours or $500 daily fines. What would you do if they vandalized your family legacy? Where are you watching from? Drop your worst HOA nightmare below. Let me back up and tell you how this nightmare started. My name's Marcus Blackwood, 52, retired Navy logistics officer who spent 20 years keeping aircraft carriers supplied across 3 oceans. After my messy divorce, I was rotting in a cramped San Diego apartment, watching my 15-year-old daughter Sage disappear into her phone during our awkward weekend visits. Then Uncle Ezra died at 89, leaving me his lakefront cottage in the Colorado Rockies, the only family member who ever gave a damn about me. I'd visited maybe twice as a kid, but Ezra was our family's living legend. Built everything himself, including a hand-carved dock that had weathered 40 Colorado winters without a single repair. The man lived debt-free for 3 decades in a world designed to keep you paying forever. Alpine Lake sits like God's private swimming pool between pine-covered peaks. 300 acres of water so clear you can see trout swimming 30 feet down. Ezra's cottage is pure 1940s craftsmanship. Thick log walls, riverstone fireplace, and wraparound porch that smells like pine sap and old memories. Completely paid off, which felt like inheriting a winning lottery ticket after years of rent slavery. The community looked like a postcard paradise. 47 homes scattered around pristine shoreline, manicured lawns that belonged in magazines, luxury cars worth more than most people's houses. The Lakeside Estates HOA collected $350 monthly for maintaining property values and community standards, whatever that meant. Then I met the dictator in khakis, Delilah Thornfield, 58, former corporate HR executioner turned HOA president for life. She rules from an $800,000 glass fortress directly across my humble log cabin, the architectural equivalent of a middle finger pointed at Ezra's simple lifestyle. Her white BMW X7 sits in a circular driveway like a throne, never showing a speck of mountain dust. Delilah dresses exclusively in pressed country club uniforms, carries clipboards like weapons, and has issued 127 violation notices in 2 years. Neighbors whisper about her measuring grass with rulers, timing dog walks with stopwatches, and photographing violations with forensic precision. 2 families had already sold and fled her reign of suburban terror. The confrontation came week 2, 7 a.m. on my dock. I'm holding coffee, watching sunrise paint the mountains gold, when her designer heels start clicking across wooden planks like a countdown timer. Her department store perfume hits me like chemical warfare, flowery violence against the clean mountain air. Your boat creates unsightly ripples that disturb our peaceful lake aesthetic, she announces, clipboard raised like she's serving divorce papers. I glance at my 1985 Bayliner 3270, Uncle Ezra's pride and joy, meticulously maintained but showing honest age next to the neighbors' floating palaces. Ma'am, it's properly registered and insured. I'm well within my rights. Her smile could have cracked the dock planks. We'll see about that, won't we? What followed was psychological warfare disguised as community concern. Day 10. Certified violation notice. Day 15. Lawyer's threat about community standards. Day 20. Anonymous county complaint claiming I operated an unlicensed commercial vessel. Absurd since I used it for weekend fishing and evening cruises when Sage visited. Day 25 brought Delilah's masterstroke, a petition signed by 12 neighbors claiming my boat somehow destroyed their quality of life. According to these people, my diesel engine's gentle purr, quieter than their leaf blowers, shattered the morning serenity like a chainsaw concert. The mountain mist rises off the lake each dawn like ghostly fingers, and I started wondering how Uncle Ezra had survived here so peacefully. His old toolbox sat on the porch filled with decades of practical wisdom, but nothing prepared me for an enemy armed with HOA covenants and unlimited spite. That's when they destroyed his boat. That's when they made it personal. After discovering my vandalized boat, I did what any former Navy officer would do. I treated this like a military operation and started gathering intelligence on the enemy. First mission: infiltrate the county courthouse. 6 hours digging through HOA covenants in a basement that smelled like old paper and bureaucratic defeat. Most documents were standard suburban control nonsense: grass height tyranny, approved paint color fascism, the usual small-town dictator playbook. But something caught my eye in Section 12, original property owners maintaining certain grandfathered rights. Back in my Navy days, I'd learned that overlooked paperwork often contained the keys to victory. This felt like finding enemy submarine coordinates hidden in routine supply manifests. Next, I installed a security perimeter around my dock. 4 weatherproof cameras with night vision, the kind that could spot a raccoon stealing garbage at midnight. All footage uploaded to cloud storage that Delilah couldn't touch with a crowbar and a court order. Deputy Rodriguez, a weathered veteran who looked like he'd survived actual wars, treated my vandalism report with military precision. He photographed every orange letter and bagged paint samples like CSY evidence. "Son," he said while scribbling notes, "we've had 3 HOA harassment complaints this month. These suburban dictators are getting out of hand." My counterstrike was swift and surgical. A certified demand letter requesting $3,500 for boat repairs, immediate cessation of harassment, and a formal written apology. I hand-delivered copies to ensure Princess Delilah couldn't claim postal ignorance. Her response was nuclear warfare disguised as community concern. Within 48 hours, she'd convened an emergency board meeting with the subtlety of a fire alarm. The agenda read, "Addressing problem resident and implementing necessary protective measures." Bureaucratic language for, "Let's destroy this guy's life before he fights back." Delilah's master plan revealed the mind of a true sociopath, a new covenant amendment banning watercraft over 25 feet or older than 10 years. If passed, my boat would become contraband overnight, subject to daily fines that could bankrupt a small country. But wait, there's more. She launched a propaganda campaign worthy of election season, printing flyers claiming my boat posed an environmental catastrophe. According to Delilah's twisted reality, my well-maintained diesel engine was single-handedly murdering every fish in the lake. The comedy gold moment came when she recruited volunteer photographers to document my excessive wake violations. Picture this: 3 grown adults positioned around the lake with cameras like paparazzi hunting celebrities, waiting for me to commit the heinous crime of driving my boat. When I finally took my evening cruise, puttering along at grandmother in a wheelchair speed, they snapped photos like I was performing water acrobatics. Then came the game-changing discovery that would flip this entire war on its head. While organizing Uncle Ezra's basement, a place that smelled like motor oil and old wisdom, I found a cardboard box labeled property papers in his careful handwriting. Inside lay manila folders containing decades of documents, like archaeological layers of legal history. Tax records, surveys, correspondence dating back to when people wore actual hats. One yellowed deed from 1923 stopped me cold. The language included phrases about riparian ownership extending to high water mark and grantor retaining perpetual rights to lake water usage. I didn't understand the legal terminology, but something in my gut, the same instinct that had kept me alive through Navy logistics nightmares, screamed that this document was important. My covert intelligence gathering revealed the community's underground resistance movement. 3 neighbors approached me like secret agents sharing classified information. Retired teacher Beth Morrison whispered during a mailbox encounter, "She destroyed the Hendersons 2 years ago." 15,000 in fines for growing tomatoes she claimed violated aesthetic standards. 3 kids couldn't afford the legal battle. Vietnam veteran Jim Santos had his own war story. $2,000 fine for painting my mailbox the wrong shade of green. She brought a color wheel to prove the violation. Woman makes drill sergeants look reasonable. The pattern crystallized like ice forming on lake water. Delilah systematically targeted anyone disrupting her suburban paradise fantasy, then weaponized HOA bureaucracy to force them into financial surrender or community exile. She was a serial neighborhood killer, and I was her latest hunting trophy. But unlike her previous victims, I had military training in hostile situation management. 20 years dealing with supply chain warfare had taught me patience, preparation, and the tactical advantage of letting enemies expose their weaknesses before delivering the killing blow. My morning coffee sessions on the dock became strategic planning meetings, pine needle aroma mixing with diesel fumes while I sketched battle plans like a general preparing for siege. The rumble of my boat engine each evening became psychological warfare, a daily reminder that some fights are worth having, and some bullies need to learn that picking on the wrong person can destroy everything they've built. The woman thought she was hunting defenseless prey. She had no idea she'd hooked a predator. Delilah's next move proved she'd crossed the line from neighborhood tyrant to actual felon. I discovered her handiwork after a peaceful grocery run to town, my weekly escape from the lake's suburban theater of war. Returning with enough supplies to survive a siege, I found my boat drifting like a ghost ship 50 yards from shore, scraping against rocks with each wave. Uncle Ezra's pristine hull now sported fresh gouges along the waterline, battle scars that made my stomach clench. The dock lines hadn't naturally loosened or aged through. Someone had sliced them with surgical precision, leaving clean cuts that screamed premeditated sabotage. My security cameras captured the crime in grainy night vision poetry, a figure in dark clothing working with practiced efficiency at 2 a.m., then vanishing like a suburban ninja. But criminals always leave calling cards. There, idling at the footage's edge like a smoking gun, sat Delilah's distinctive white BMW X7. The woman had personally executed this midnight mission, too narcissistic to delegate her dirty work. My response was swift and merciless. I transformed my dock into a fortress that would intimidate Navy SEALs, motion-activated floodlights capable of illuminating small aircraft, battery backups that could survive electromagnetic pulses, and redundant cloud storage systems distributed across 3 time zones. Every piece of equipment got marine-grade locks that would challenge master thieves. More importantly, I became a documentary filmmaker of suburban warfare. Colorado's one-party consent laws, knowledge gained during my ugly divorce, meant every conversation, violation notice, and harassment incident could be recorded in courtroom-quality evidence. My phone became a weapon of legal mass destruction. A Zoom consultation with a maritime attorney revealed legal concepts that made my tactical mind sing. Something called navigational servitude grants waterway usage rights that override local busybody regulations. HOAs can nitpick dock colors and boat covers, but controlling actual water usage requires legitimate government authority, something Princess Delilah's suburban kingdom definitely lacked. Meanwhile, my courthouse archaeology was unearthing buried treasure that would reshape this entire war. Alpine Lake wasn't some pristine natural wonder. It was artificial, created in 1918 when my great-great-grandfather Silas Blackwood dammed a mountain creek for his logging empire. The man had carved civilization from wilderness using nothing but determination and strategic ruthlessness that apparently ran in the family bloodline. The smoking gun came in a 1923 deed that made my pulse race. Grantor retains perpetual rights to lake water usage and access. Their property records showed an unbroken chain of ownership, Silas to his son, then Uncle Ezra, finally landing in my lap like inherited artillery. Water rights that had never been sold, transferred, or surrendered to any developer or suburban dictator. The beautiful irony crystallized. In 1985, developers built lakeside estates, assuming they'd acquired lake access rights they'd never actually purchased. For 38 years, the HOA had been operating under delusions of authority they legally didn't possess. Every lake maintenance fee they'd collected was potentially theft from my family's property. But Delilah was escalating faster than a rocket launch. She proposed a $5,000 emergency assessment disguised as environmental protection, but actually designed to fund extended legal warfare against me. Her propaganda painted my boat as an ecological disaster comparable to the Exxon Valdez. According to her alternate reality, my gentle diesel engine was murdering fish families and destroying aquatic habitats through sheer existence. The comedy peaked when she hired a marine expert who turned out to be her brother-in-law's kayak rental buddy. This nautical genius produced a handwritten report on coffee-stained napkins, concluding that my 25-foot boat somehow generated more environmental damage than neighbors' 35-foot speedboats. His scientific methodology involved standing on shore squinting really hard at wave patterns. Delilah's Facebook propaganda ministry launched Save Our Lake with sunset photos and captions about protecting natural heritage from industrial-scale commercial exploitation. She posted images of my boat with descriptions that made it sound like a floating oil rig disrupting peaceful family swimming. Her discrimination became less coded daily. References to outside agitators and undesirable elements peppered social media posts, along with implications that my lifestyle choices threatened property values. Corporate HR departments would have fired her for less subtle bigotry. My underground intelligence network expanded as more neighbors shared resistance stories. The pattern was undeniable: systematic elimination of anyone challenging Delilah's suburban utopia fantasy. Families destroyed through financial warfare, forced into surrender or exile by a woman drunk on petty power. But I wasn't some helpless family with vulnerable children and crushing mortgages. I was a combat veteran with pension security, research skills, and mounting evidence that this entire HOA exceeded its legal authority by approximately 100%. Evening walks around what might legally be my private lake filled the air with pine needle perfume and children's laughter. Sounds of community joy being weaponized by a sociopath who'd declared war on military-trained opposition. She thought she was destroying a helpless victim. She'd actually awakened a predator with legal nuclear weapons. Delilah's desperation reached new heights when she decided to weaponize the legal system itself. The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning like a declaration of war, delivered by a postal worker who looked apologetic about carrying such obvious hostility. HOA Attorney Services, a law firm that specialized in suburban tyranny, demanded immediate boat removal under threat of a $10,000 fine lawsuit for covenant violations and community disruption. The letter's language dripped with legal intimidation designed to terrify normal homeowners into submission. They claimed I'd signed binding HOA agreements when inheriting the property, subjecting me to all current and future covenant modifications. 10 days to comply or face litigation that would pursue all available remedies, including monetary damages and injunctive relief. Translation: surrender, or we'll bankrupt you through legal fees. My response was surgical precision wrapped in expensive letterhead. I hired Sarah Chen, a local property attorney whose reputation for dismantling HOA overreach made suburban dictators wake up screaming. Sarah's preliminary review of my water rights documentation made her literally laugh out loud during our first meeting. "Marcus," she said while examining Uncle Ezra's deed collection, "this isn't just a strong legal position. This is thermonuclear warfare disguised as property law." Sarah filed a preliminary injunction preventing the HOA from restricting my lake access while we prepared our nuclear option. Her counter-demand letter was beautiful in its simplicity: prove your authority over lake usage or withdraw all threats immediately. Meanwhile, my research had uncovered the legal equivalent of buried treasure. The 1985 developer who created Lakeside Estates had committed a fatal error in property acquisition. His warranty deed specifically excluded all water rights and riparian privileges from the sale to individual homeowners. The HOA covenants contained a gap so massive you could drive aircraft carriers through it. No legal authority over the lake itself. County records classified Alpine Lake as a private water body with riparian access rights, meaning whoever owned those rights controlled everything. The HOA had been collecting lake maintenance fees for 38 years without legal authority, like charging tolls on someone else's private road. But the real bombshell came when I hired a licensed surveyor to map exact property boundaries. Professional surveying revealed that my inherited property extended 30 feet further into the lake than anyone had assumed. Several HOA members' precious docks were technically trespassing on my riparian zone. Most satisfying of all, Delilah's decorative gazebo, her personal lakeside meditation pavilion where she plotted neighborhood destruction, sat entirely on my legal property. The woman had been conducting her war against me from land that I technically owned. Delilah's response to my legal counterstrike was predictably nuclear. An emergency board meeting approved a $25,000 legal budget, money that would have to come from homeowner assessments since the HOA's reserves couldn't cover extended warfare. She contacted a local newspaper reporter with hints about environmental concerns and community safety issues. attempting to manufacture public pressure through media manipulation. Her most desperate move involved the State Parks Department. Delilah filed complaints claiming I needed commercial permits for my boat, despite obvious evidence of private recreational usage. When that failed, she organized a community safety meeting, implying my vessel posed navigational hazards to children and elderly swimmers. The underground resistance movement was growing stronger as neighbors witnessed Delilah's increasingly unhinged behavior. Beth Morrison shared documentation of previous harassment campaigns, families forced to remove playground equipment deemed aesthetically inappropriate, elderly residents fined for using medical equipment that violated visual standards, young couples bankrupted over mailbox height violations measured with carpenter's levels. Jim Santos revealed the most damaging intelligence: HOA financial records showing a pattern of expensive legal battles that drained community funds while enriching Delilah's preferred law firms. She'd been using association money to fund personal vendettas, turning neighbor disputes into profit centers for attorneys who encouraged extended litigation. The Stewart artist provided psychological insight that explained everything. She targets anyone who represents independence or creativity, Maria Stewart observed during a clandestine coffee meeting. Your uncle lived here for decades without bowing to her authority. You inherited that same independence, and it threatens her entire power structure. Her husband David added the crucial detail: 3 other families have left in the past 5 years. All of them were original property owners with grandfathered rights that complicated her control schemes. The pattern was crystal clear. Delilah systematically eliminated anyone whose legal status challenged her authority. She couldn't tolerate property owners who predated her regime, especially those with rights that superseded HOA jurisdiction. But I had military training in patience and strategic planning. While she exhausted resources on desperate legal maneuvers, I was building an airtight case that would destroy her authority permanently. Every harassment incident, every false claim, every abuse of HOA power was being documented with prosecution-quality evidence. The autumn air carried the scent of victory mixed with pine needles as I planned the final phase of this suburban war. Delilah thought she was drowning an enemy. She was actually filling her own grave with evidence that would bury her regime forever. The time for defensive operations was ending. Phase 2 would be total warfare. The document that would detonate Delilah's entire empire arrived on a Wednesday morning disguised as routine legal paperwork. Sarah's paralegal had been conducting what lawyers call a comprehensive title search, basically archaeological excavation through a century of property records. What she discovered made Sarah call an emergency meeting that would change everything. "Marcus," Sarah said, spreading documents across her conference table like battle plans. "Sit down before I tell you this. You don't just own water usage rights, you own the entire lake." The words hit me like a lightning strike. Every drop of water, every inch of lake bed, every fish swimming beneath the surface. All of it belonged to me through an unbroken chain of inheritance dating back to 1918. The legal revelation was stunning in its simplicity. When Silas Blackwood built his dam and created Alpine Lake, Colorado water law granted him absolute ownership under prior appropriation doctrine. First valid claim wins everything. His 1923 deed transferring surrounding land parcels specifically retained all water rights, lakebed ownership, and exclusive riparian privileges in perpetuity. Those rights had passed through 4 generations of Blackwood men like a hidden inheritance, forgotten but never legally surrendered. Uncle Ezra had owned this lake for 30 years without realizing the full extent of his power. Now that nuclear authority had landed in my lap. Sarah's research revealed the crushing scope of HOA violations. For 38 years, every homeowner around Alpine Lake had been trespassing on my private property. Every dock, every swimming platform, every boat launch, every decorative gazebo, all constructed without permission on land and water that belonged exclusively to me. The financial implications were staggering. The HOA had collected $847,000 in lake maintenance fees over 4 decades, money extracted illegally from homeowners for services performed on someone else's private property. Every assessment, every improvement project, every dollar spent on lake-related activities constituted theft from my family's estate. But the most delicious irony involved Delilah personally. Her $800,000 glass palace derived its entire value from lake access and waterfront views. Without those privileges, her property value would crater by 60 to 70% overnight. She'd built her real estate empire on land she didn't own, collecting fees for services she had no authority to provide. Her precious meditation gazebo, the lakeside sanctuary where she plotted neighborhood destruction, sat entirely on my riparian zone. Every HOA meeting held there, every violation notice signed there, every harassment campaign launched from that pavilion had been conducted on property that belonged to her primary target. Sarah explained my legal options with the enthusiasm of a prosecutor describing slam-dunk evidence. I could immediately prohibit all lake access, forcing removal of every structure built on my property over 4 decades. Trespass lawsuits against 47 families would generate damages exceeding the HOA's total assets. Property liens could force sales that would destroy the community overnight. You have grounds to bankrupt this entire HOA and most of its members, Sarah concluded. Delilah picked a fight with someone who could legally evict her from her own backyard. The power shift was intoxicating, but something Uncle Ezra had taught me during childhood visits echoed in my memory. He'd shared this lake with neighbors for 30 years, never wielding his legal authority like a weapon. His philosophy had been simple. Good neighbors make good communities, and bullies eventually destroy themselves if you give them enough rope. I didn't want to become the suburban dictator that Delilah had been. But I also wouldn't tolerate continued harassment from someone who'd been trespassing on my property while collecting illegal fees and conducting psychological warfare against my family's legacy. The woman thought she owned this lake. She was about to discover she'd been squatting on my land while declaring war against its rightful owner. Time to educate Princess Delilah about the difference between authority and ownership. The next phase required military precision and legal strategy that would make Pentagon planners proud. Sarah assembled her A-team like we were planning D-Day. Her partner, Michael Rodriguez, a property rights specialist who'd spent 15 years dismantling HOA overreach, joined our war council with the enthusiasm of a prosecutor who'd just inherited the crime of the century. Together, they developed a 3-tier strategy: negotiate first, apply pressure second, deploy nuclear legal weapons as a last resort. Their research into similar Colorado cases revealed that my position wasn't just strong, it was historically unprecedented. Most water rights disputes involved usage percentages or seasonal access. I owned everything, period. Michael had never seen such clear-cut ownership documentation stretching back over a century. This is the holy grail of property law, he explained during our strategy session. You have absolute authority backed by bulletproof documentation. The question isn't whether you'll win, it's how much damage they'll sustain before surrendering. Building community alliances required the delicate touch of a diplomatic mission behind enemy lines. My coffee meetings with sympathetic neighbors revealed the full scope of Delilah's reign of terror. Beth Morrison brought photocopied records documenting $8,000 in bogus fines she'd paid over 5 years, violations for everything from unauthorized bird feeders to excessive holiday decorations that exceeded approved color schemes. Jim Santos provided military-grade intelligence about HOA financial operations. As a former accounting supervisor, he'd noticed irregularities in annual budget reports that suggested misappropriation of funds. Legal fees had tripled under Delilah's presidency, while actual maintenance expenses decreased. The money was being funneled into harassment campaigns rather than community improvements. The Stewart artist contributed psychological warfare insights that explained Delilah's systematic targeting methods. She eliminated independent-minded residents who threatened her authority through creative expression, property modifications, or simply refusing to bow to her arbitrary demands. Their documentation included photographs of her measuring their garden fence with a tape measure, evidence of obsessive-compulsive control that bordered on mental illness. My underground resistance network expanded to include 12 homeowners who'd been quietly documenting Delilah's abuses for years. They'd been afraid to challenge her individually, but united opposition gave them courage to share evidence they'd been secretly collecting. Security camera footage, recorded phone calls, written correspondence, a treasure trove of harassment documentation that would make prosecutors weep with joy. The evidence compilation project became my full-time occupation. I created detailed timelines of every violation notice, every threatening letter, every instance of property damage or intimidation. Security cameras had captured 3 separate vandalism attempts, plus dozens of instances where Delilah photographed my property from public areas like a suburban stalker. Financial analysis revealed the true scope of HOA corruption. Sarah's forensic accountant discovered that emergency assessments had been used to fund legal battles against individual residents, rather than community improvements. Delilah had essentially weaponized neighbors' money to finance personal vendettas, a practice that violated both HOA bylaws and state regulations governing nonprofit associations. The legal strategy session felt like planning a military campaign. Sarah explained quiet title actions, court procedures that establish definitive property ownership when disputes exist. My case wouldn't require complex litigation since the documentation was ironclad. We'd essentially be asking a judge to confirm what historical records already proved. I owned the lake, everyone else was trespassing, and the HOA had been operating illegally for decades. Michael outlined unjust enrichment claims that would force repayment of illegally collected fees plus interest. Organizations can't profit from services they have no authority to provide, especially when those services involve someone else's private property. The HOA's 38 years of lake maintenance fee collection constituted systematic theft that could bankrupt their entire operation. We calculated potential damages with the precision of military logistics officers, $847,000 in illegal fees, plus accumulated interest at legal judgment rates. Trespass damages for unauthorized construction on my property. Environmental impact study costs that should have been conducted before building on private land. The total exceeded $1.2 million, more than the combined assets of every HOA member. The communication strategy balanced diplomacy with overwhelming force. I would give Delilah one opportunity for reasonable settlement before unleashing legal nuclear weapons. 30 days to negotiate a licensing agreement that preserved community lake access while acknowledging my ownership and authority. Our backup plan included media coordination with local newspapers who loved David versus Goliath stories involving suburban tyranny. The final option was simultaneous lawsuits against the HOA and individual trespassing members, legal carpet bombing that would destroy the community's financial stability while establishing precedent for property rights enforcement. The negotiation framework was generous considering my absolute legal authority: $50 annual licensing fee per household, removal of all boat restrictions, Delilah's resignation as president, and replacement leadership elected by actual democratic process rather than authoritarian appointment. During evening strategy walks around my private lake, the scent of autumn pine mixed with the satisfaction of impending justice. Every peaceful sound, children playing, neighbors socializing, boats puttering across calm water, represented community harmony that Delilah had been systematically destroying through her toxic leadership. The woman had declared war on someone who owned the battlefield. Time to teach her the difference between borrowed authority and actual ownership. Delilah's intelligence network must have picked up whispers about my legal research because her next escalation felt like a cornered dictator's desperate last stand. The emergency HOA board meeting she called had all the subtlety of a military coup. Her agenda proposed an immediate $50,000 legal defense fund, financed through emergency assessments that would hit every homeowner like financial carpet bombing. But the real agenda item was her suggestion to hire a private investigator to dig up character evidence against me, suburban warfare disguised as due diligence. "We need to know who we're really dealing with," she announced to her rubber-stamp board members. "Military backgrounds can indicate aggressive tendencies that threaten community safety." Her desperation was showing like cracks in a dam ready to burst. The sabotage attempts escalated to levels that would make CIA operatives proud. My dock's electrical connection mysteriously failed during a convenient storm, cutting power to security cameras for 12 critical hours. When I investigated the next morning, the junction box showed clear evidence of deliberate tampering, wires cut with precision tools, not weather damage. My boat's engine intake became clogged with foreign debris that definitely didn't occur naturally. Someone had stuffed it with rags, plastic bags, and what appeared to be dog toys. A cocktail of materials designed to cause expensive engine damage if I'd started it without inspection. Only my Navy training and equipment checks prevented thousands in repair costs. Anonymous complaints flooded county offices like coordinated psychological warfare. The health department received reports about boat fuel contamination threatening drinking water supplies. Environmental agencies got detailed accusations about unauthorized chemical disposal and aquatic habitat destruction. Every agency had to waste resources investigating obviously false claims filed by someone with intimate knowledge of bureaucratic complaint procedures. The fake environmental reports were masterpieces of suburban fiction. Someone had submitted official-looking documents claiming my boat maintenance activities were creating toxic runoff patterns and endangered species habitat disruption. The reports included scientific terminology that sounded impressive to bureaucrats but was complete nonsense to anyone with actual environmental knowledge. Meanwhile, my silent preparation was building an evidence fortress that would withstand nuclear assault. I installed backup security systems with cellular connectivity that couldn't be sabotaged through electrical tampering. Hidden cameras and waterproof housings provided redundant coverage from angles Delilah couldn't anticipate. Every harassment incident, every false report, every act of vandalism was being documented with prosecution-quality evidence that would make federal investigators jealous. Water quality testing became my secret weapon against environmental false claims. I hired a certified laboratory to conduct comprehensive analysis that would prove my boat posed zero contamination risk. The results were beautiful. Pristine water quality with pollutant levels below detection limits. More importantly, testing revealed that several neighbors' septic systems were actually closer to regulatory violations than my boat maintenance activities. The environmental consultant I retained, a legitimate expert with PhD credentials, provided detailed analysis proving that my boat's impact was negligible compared to natural lake processes. His report systematically demolished every fake claim about wake damage, fuel contamination, and habitat disruption. We had scientific ammunition to destroy Delilah's environmental warfare campaign. Community pressure dynamics were shifting like tectonic plates beneath Delilah's authoritarian empire. More residents began approaching me privately with support and intelligence about her previous campaigns. Stories emerged of systematic harassment against anyone who challenged her arbitrary authority. Pattern recognition revealed her targeting methodology. Identify independent-minded residents, manufacture violations, escalate financial pressure until they surrendered or fled. HOA financial records showed the devastating cost of her legal warfare addiction. Community funds were being drained through expensive attorney consultations, frivolous litigation threats, and investigative services that served personal vendettas rather than community interests. Homeowners were unknowingly financing their own oppression through assessments that funded harassment rather than improvements. A growing faction of residents began questioning whether Delilah's presidency was worth the financial and social costs. Quiet conversations in grocery store parking lots and neighborhood walks revealed widespread frustration with her divisive leadership style. People were exhausted by constant conflict and escalating expenses that served no constructive purpose. The private investigator she'd hired inadvertently became my greatest asset. His background check revealed my exemplary Navy service record, volunteer work with veteran organizations, and marine conservation activities. Instead of finding character flaws, he documented 20 years of leadership experience and community service that contradicted every negative claim Delilah had made about my integrity or intentions. His report showed that I was significantly wealthier than Delilah had assumed. Military pension plus consulting income that made her financial intimidation tactics laughably ineffective. I wasn't some vulnerable family that could be bankrupted through legal fees. I was a combat veteran with resources to fight extended warfare if necessary. The investigation backfired spectacularly, providing legal documentation of my qualifications while revealing Delilah's bad faith in hiring investigators to manufacture personal attacks. Evening walks around what I now knew was my private lake filled the air with autumn pine perfume and the distant sound of Delilah's empire crumbling. Every desperate escalation was digging her grave deeper while strengthening my legal position. She thought she was destroying an enemy. She was actually providing evidence for her own prosecution. Delilah's final gambit proved that desperation makes people stupid, even those who think they're master manipulators. The lawsuit hit like a nuclear bomb disguised as legal paperwork. HOA versus Marcus Blackwood, filed in district court with enough dramatic flair to make soap opera writers jealous. $100,000 in damages for lost property values caused by defendants' willful violation of community standards and deliberate disruption of peaceful residential enjoyment. The complaint read like fiction written by someone who'd confused anger with evidence. According to Delilah's alternate reality, my boat had single-handedly destroyed the community's real estate market through industrial-scale recreational activities and environmental degradation visible from satellite imagery. She claimed my diesel engine created noise pollution comparable to commercial shipping operations, despite measuring decibel levels quieter than most lawnmowers. But the real comedy gold was her attempt to place a lien on Uncle Ezra's cottage for unpaid emergency assessments I'd never agreed to pay. She'd essentially declared war on someone she assumed was financially vulnerable, not realizing I had military pension security and legal resources that could outlast her entire operation. Her hired marine engineer produced a report so obviously fabricated it belonged in a museum of legal malpractice. This expert concluded that my 25-foot boat generated more wake damage than neighbors' 35-foot speedboats through mysterious displacement physics that violated basic laws of hydrodynamics. His methodology involved standing on shore with binoculars and measuring waves with a ruler, scientific rigor that would embarrass middle school students. My response was strategic silence that drove Delilah absolutely insane. While she burned through community money on frivolous litigation, I documented every false claim and excessive legal expense for future damages calculations. Sarah advised letting the HOA spend themselves into bankruptcy while we built our nuclear counterattack. Every dollar they wasted on baseless lawsuits would become evidence of bad faith litigation when we revealed my lake ownership. The bribery attempt came disguised as a neighborly peace offering. Delilah approached me during my evening dock maintenance with the fake smile of a used car salesman closing a desperate deal. Her generous settlement proposal involved dropping the lawsuit if I limited boat usage to weekdays only, signed restrictive agreements about engine noise and wake patterns, and agreed never to challenge HOA authority again. We could make this whole unpleasant situation disappear, she purred while her perfume competed with diesel fumes for air superiority. All you have to do is be reasonable about community standards. When I politely declined her magnanimous offer to surrender my legal rights, her mask slipped like cheap makeup in rain. "You have no idea how difficult I can make your life here," she hissed with the venom of someone who'd perfected psychological warfare through years of suburban terrorism. The community meeting ambush was her masterstroke of manipulative theater. She scheduled a mandatory HOA assembly ostensibly about budget planning and community safety concerns, but the real agenda was public execution disguised as democratic process. The meeting room was packed with her allies, loaded with misleading handouts about boat violations, and choreographed to force an emergency vote on comprehensive boat restrictions before I could mount effective defense. Her opening presentation was propaganda worthy of totalitarian regimes. Enlarged photographs made my boat look like an aircraft carrier invading peaceful waters. Charts showed environmental damage trends that correlated my boat usage with completely unrelated lake condition changes. Testimony from concerned residents painted me as an aggressive outsider disrupting generations of community harmony. 3 expert witnesses delivered rehearsed performances about boat-related safety hazards, noise pollution, and environmental destruction. Their credentials included owning kayaks, reading boating magazines, and watching nature documentaries. Scientific methodology involved measuring my boat's wake with pool noodles and timing engine noise with smartphone apps. Sarah's presence at the meeting was strategic psychological warfare. Her expensive suit, legal briefcase, and court reporter's notebook sent signals that this wasn't just neighborhood drama anymore. When she announced my countersuit for harassment and property damage, several board members went visibly pale as they realized potential personal liability for knowingly supporting frivolous litigation. The character assassination campaign reached desperate heights as Delilah portrayed me as an aggressive military operative whose boat represented potential security threats to community safety. She implied my Navy background indicated violent tendencies, suggested my evening cruises were surveillance operations, and claimed my security cameras violated neighbors' privacy rights. But her support network was cracking under pressure like ice in spring sunshine. Board members began questioning legal expenses that threatened to bankrupt the community through Delilah's personal vendetta. The treasurer expressed concerns about fiduciary responsibility when association funds were being used to finance individual harassment campaigns. Several longtime residents expressed frustration with escalating conflict that served no constructive community purpose. My underground allies provided spontaneous character defense that demolished Delilah's propaganda. Beth Morrison publicly described my assistance with elderly neighbors' dock repairs. Jim Santos mentioned my donation to the local school's environmental education program. The stewards shared stories about my helpful advice during their own boat maintenance projects. The room's atmosphere shifted as residents realized they'd been manipulated into funding personal warfare rather than community improvement. Delilah's empire was collapsing from within as people discovered the financial and social costs of suburban tyranny. Time for the nuclear revelation that would end this war permanently. The Alpine Lake Community Center had never hosted a more dramatic showdown than the monthly HOA meeting that would detonate Delilah's empire. 67 residents packed into a room designed for 40, tension thick enough to cut with a chainsaw. Local newspaper reporter Janet Mills positioned herself strategically with camera and recorder after receiving an anonymous tip about a David versus Goliath property rights battle with shocking revelations. County Sheriff Deputy Rodriguez sat in the back corner, summoned by Delilah's complaints about potential community disruption from my aggressive military background. Sarah Charlie accompanied me like a legal bodyguard, carrying bankers' boxes filled with historical documents, survey maps, and presentation materials that would reshape this community forever. Her confidence radiated the energy of a prosecutor holding smoking gun evidence in a murder trial. Delilah opened with theatrical fury worthy of Shakespeare's villains. "Tonight we address the crisis threatening our peaceful community," she proclaimed from the makeshift podium, gesturing toward me like I was a war criminal. "This emergency motion will ban Marcus Blackwood's boat immediately, protecting our lake from further environmental destruction and restoring the tranquility we've cherished for decades." Her enlarged photographs made my boat look like an industrial disaster. Charts displayed wake damage patterns and noise pollution data that would have impressed propaganda ministers. She demanded I pay $15,000 in emergency lake restoration assessments while removing my inappropriate vessel within 48 hours. "We have overwhelming community support," she announced, waving her manufactured petition like a battle flag. "It's time to choose between one person's selfish recreational demands and our collective quality of life." The room buzzed with nervous energy as residents contemplated voting to destroy their neighbors' property rights based on fabricated evidence and manipulated emotions. That's when I politely requested 10 minutes to respond before any voting occurred. Sarah began distributing copies of historical deed research to every attendee while I connected my laptop to the wall projector. The 1923 property deed appeared on screen in enlarged glory, its century-old language about perpetual water rights and exclusive lake ownership clearly visible to everyone present. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said with the calm authority of someone holding nuclear weapons, "I don't just have the right to use this lake. I own it. Every drop of water, every inch of lake bed, every fish swimming below the surface belongs to me, through unbroken inheritance from my great-great-grandfather who created this lake in 1918. The silence was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop into that crystal-clear water that apparently belonged to me. Sarah's laser pointer traced property boundaries on the projected survey map, highlighting the devastating scope of community trespassing. Every dock, every swimming platform, every boat launch, and every structure touching this lake sits on Marcus's private property. For 38 years, the HOA has been collecting fees for maintaining someone else's land without legal authority. Audible gasps rippled through the crowd as the implications sank in like stones thrown into deep water. Delilah's face turned white as fresh snow, then red as sunset, then green as lake algae as she processed the complete destruction of her legal position. "That's impossible!" she shrieked, abandoning all pretense of dignified leadership. "Those documents are forgeries. Legal technicalities. We have prescriptive rights from decades of community usage." Deputy Rodriguez leaned forward with professional interest as tensions escalated toward potential violence. Janet Mills's camera captured every moment of Delilah's public meltdown for tomorrow's front-page story. The documentary evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Chain of title showing unbroken water rights ownership from 1918 to present. Survey maps proving most HOA lake structures violated property boundaries. County records confirming lake classification as private property, not community resource. Expert legal opinions supporting my exclusive ownership authority. Several board members began frantically calculating potential financial liability as the scope of illegal fee collection became clear. $847,000 extracted from homeowners for services performed on someone else's private property. Trespass damages for unauthorized construction spanning 4 decades. Environmental impact studies that should have been conducted before building on private land. Then came my mic drop moment that would echo through suburban legend forever. I stood slowly, projecting the calm confidence of someone holding absolute authority, and spoke directly to the shell-shocked community. I could legally demand removal of every dock and structure tomorrow. I could prohibit all lake access and sue every family for decades of trespassing. I could bankrupt this HOA and destroy your property values overnight. The room held its collective breath like divers underwater. Instead, I'm offering reasonable annual licensing for continued lake access. $50 per household, significantly less than the illegal fees you've been paying. All existing structures can remain. Community boat launches and swimming areas will be preserved. My voice carried the authority of absolute ownership, tempered by reasonable generosity. But harassment and vandalism of my property stops immediately. Delilah's reign of suburban terrorism ends tonight. Deputy Rodriguez reviewed my evidence of property damage and false reporting, confirming my legal right to exclude trespassers while warning about criminal charges for continued harassment. The community responded with spontaneous democracy that buried Delilah's dictatorship forever. The aftermath unfolded like the most satisfying movie ending you've ever witnessed. Within 2 weeks, Delilah and her 3 hardcore supporters had fled the community like defeated generals abandoning a burning fortress. Their for sale signs sprouted overnight, desperate to escape before more residents discovered they'd been living under the rule of someone who'd been illegally collecting fees while trespassing on my property. Property values didn't crater as she'd threatened. They soared 15% once buyers realized they could live in a lakefront paradise without suburban Stalin measuring their grass height. My cottage became a pilgrimage site for apologies and peace offerings. Beth Morrison arrived with homemade apple pie that tasted like sweet victory. Jim Santos delivered a bottle of bourbon with a note, "To the man who liberated us from the HOA gulag." The Stewart artists painted a gorgeous watercolor of my boat, creating gentle ripples titled "Waves of Freedom," now hanging proudly above my fireplace. Janet Mills's story exploded across social media like digital wildfire. Navy veteran discovers he owns entire lake, destroys HOA dictatorship. Inspired copycat investigations nationwide. Homeowners from Florida to Washington started digging through their own property deeds, discovering forgotten rights that predated suburban tyranny. My victory became the template for fighting back against petty authoritarians who mistake clipboards for crowns. The legal resolution was poetry in motion. The HOA settlement of $50,000 covered every penny of my costs, while Sarah negotiated ironclad protections against future harassment. Delilah avoided criminal prosecution by signing agreements that essentially banished her from ever holding community authority again. She slithered away like a snake fleeing sunrise, leaving behind a community finally free to breathe. The transformation under new leadership was miraculous. Beth Morrison's presidency brought teachers' wisdom and grandmothers' love to replace Delilah's toxic dictatorship. Monthly dues plummeted 40% through efficient management focused on actual improvements, rather than financing personal vendettas. They eliminated 83 harassment categories, turning community guidelines from criminal code into neighborly suggestions. My licensing agreement generated comfortable income while preserving lake access for families who'd called this place home for decades. $50 annually per household, less than most people spend on coffee monthly, replaced the illegal fees that had drained budgets while enriching no one except lawyers. The personal healing began when Sage spent her entire summer with me, transforming from sullen teenager visiting divorced dad into confident young woman who could dock a boat and identify every fish species in our lake. Her friends filled the water with joyful screams instead of legal documents, creating memories that Uncle Ezra would have treasured. But the crown jewel of this victory was the Alpine Lake Conservation Scholarship, $5,000 annually for students studying environmental science or property law. 3 years running, our recipients have gone on to protect watersheds and fight HOA corruption across the western states. Settlement money that could have bought toys instead became investment in justice that will outlive us all. The broader impact exceeded my wildest dreams. Our case became required reading in law schools, inspiring Colorado's HOA Accountability Act that forces suburban dictatorships to prove their authority before imposing restrictions. Sarah's law review article has been cited in 43 successful property rights cases. helping families reclaim freedoms they never knew they'd lost. Delilah's cosmic comeuppance was absolutely perfect. Her Arizona gated community proved that karma has a wicked sense of humor. Within 6 months, she was battling $1,000 fines for unauthorized wind chimes and pool equipment that violated community aesthetic standards. The hunter became the hunted, the enforcer became the victim, the dictator learned what it feels like to live under someone else's arbitrary authority. Every morning now, I sit on my dock watching sunrise paint the mountains gold, while steam rises from coffee that tastes like freedom. Children's laughter bounces across water that legally belongs to me, but spiritually belongs to everyone who understands that home should be sanctuary, not battlefield. My boat's gentle ripples spread across the lake like rings of justice, reminding everyone that one person standing up to bullies can liberate entire communities from tyranny. Uncle Ezra's legacy became a weapon for justice rather than a target for harassment, exactly as he would have wanted. The American flag flying from my boat's stern isn't provocation anymore. It's peaceful symbol of rights defended, community restored, and proof that ordinary people can defeat extraordinary corruption when they fight smart instead of surrendering. Drop your HOA nightmare in the comments. You could be featured in next week's HOA Stories episode. Smash that subscribe button to see more neighbors fighting back against suburban tyrants, and hit the notification bell because next week we're exposing an HOA that tried to ban the American flag itself.
You've been watching HOA Stories, where entitled Karens get a reality check. If this episode gave you secondhand rage or satisfaction, hit that like, leave your take in the comments, and subscribe so you're the first in line for more weekly HOA chaos.